The day before Thanksgiving, I was in the kitchen making pumpkin pie from my late wife's recipe, Clear's throat, when my son called. He sighed and said, "Dad, don't come tomorrow. My wife thinks you'll make her guests uncomfortable." That night, I checked social media and froze. My daughter-in-law was proudly serving my wife's pie, calling it our family's secret recipe. 3 days later, they demanded $18,400 from me. I sent exactly $1, then changed every lock on my house. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I was up earlier than I normally would have been. Not because anything was calling me somewhere. That's not how life looked for me anymore. At 68 years old and 3 years into retirement, a reason to be somewhere before dawn had become a rare thing, something that used to define my mornings, but had long since faded into quiet. Welcome back to Alpha Dad Stories. I'm glad you found your way here. If these stories speak to you, stay close and come back often, because there are more where this one came from. While you settle in, I'd love to know, what are you up to right now as you listen? Driving somewhere, putting dinner together, maybe just resting after a long day? Drop it in the comments. A quick note before we go further: some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is coincidental. What matters most is the truth underneath it. There was a reason I was up before dawn. A small, self-contained kind of happiness, the sort an old man keeps to himself. No need to share it with anyone. Evelyn's pumpkin pie. Her recipe. 31 years of marriage, and she never committed a single measurement to paper. It lived somewhere between her fingertips and her instincts, some combination I watched dozens of times and never cracked. When she died 6 years ago, I took 2 Thanksgiving runs at rebuilding it from scratch. First try, I buried it in nutmeg. Second, I skimped on the brown sugar. Third year, I finally landed close enough that Nathan lifted a bite to his mouth, put his fork down slowly, and held still. Then he looked across the table and said, "That's Mom's pie, Dad." I had to face the window until I had myself together. I brought the pumpkin cans out from the pantry, set them beside the evaporated milk and the eggs, and reached for the worn wooden spoon Evelyn had used so many times. The handle had darkened to almost black. The kitchen had that November smell, the radiator ticking coffee, brewing cinnamon, already hanging in the air before it touches anything. Owen's present was already wrapped and waiting. My grandson, 9 years old, had said something offhand maybe 6 weeks back about wanting a particular remote control truck set, one throwaway comment. But I'd grabbed a notepad and written it down that same afternoon, then ordered it before dinner. Nora was more straightforward at 6. She was after anything pink and anything that glittered, and I'd found one gift that covered both. That felt like a small victory. I stacked both boxes by the front door so I wouldn't walk past them. It was shaping up to be a fine morning, the kind that made November feel like something to look forward to, rather than endure. I got started on the pie crust around 11. Evelyn's method: palms only, no rolling pin, no rushing. I was working the dough into the pan when the phone buzzed on the counter. Nathan's name on the screen. Something in my chest eased. Good timing. I needed to ask what hour he wanted me over and whether the pie was enough, or should I bring something else. "Hey, son." "Hey, Dad." The words were right, but the tone was off, this flat, careful register I'd learned to recognize over the years. It meant he'd already arrived somewhere in his head and wasn't inviting debate. "You got a minute? Got all the time in the world?" "I'm making the pie." Then a pause. "Right? Yeah." Another one after that, longer. My hand settled against the counter and stayed there. "Listen, Dad. I need to talk to you about tomorrow." "Okay." Brianna has really thrown herself into this dinner. She's put together quite a guest list. People from her office, neighbors, couples they've been meeting through the neighborhood association. He let out a breath. It's grown into something bigger than a typical year. "How many people?" I asked. My voice held. "I'm still not entirely sure how." maybe 15, 20. She wants the whole evening to have a certain feel to it. More of an occasion than a casual meal. That sounds lovely. I meant it without irony. I reached for a chair and lowered myself into it. My legs had quietly sent notice that they were done. The thing is, Dad, he trailed off, gathered himself. Brianna feels, and he said he agreed, that with the crowd she's expecting, the guest list needs to be. He searched for the word a little more intentional. Another pause. Some of her professional contacts are coming, and she wants the evening to land a certain way. I sat looking at the raw pie shell in its pan, my thumbprints still pressed into the rim. Nathan. I kept every edge out of my voice. Are you saying you don't want me there? He took a beat too long, and that told me everything. Dad, it's not a personal thing. It's just how this particular year has shaped up. Is it the clothes I wear? That came out on its own, and I instantly regretted it. Not because it was an unfair question, I already suspected the answer. Saying it aloud was going to make it real in a way I couldn't walk back from. Dad, or the things I talk about, I know I circle back to the old days. Sometimes the city contracts the electrical work. My throat had tightened. I cleared it. I know that's not riveting material for everyone. It's not that. But the way his voice fell at the end said otherwise, or at least said it wasn't entirely untrue. All right, Nathan. 2 words, low and even. The anger hadn't come yet. What came first was something denser, a slow pressure building behind the breastbone and radiating out from there. Dad, I'm sorry. Next year it's all right. I said it a second time because I needed to close the conversation cleanly, without it turning into something neither of us wanted. You take care of your evening. I'll manage. You sure? I'm sure. Tell the kids I love them. I flipped the phone over on the counter. I sat with both palms resting on the tabletop, feeling the grain of the wood. The table Evelyn and I had hauled home from an estate sale 24 years ago. The one Nathan had spread his homework across every night all through middle school, where we'd shared 10,000 unremarkable dinners, where Evelyn had sat the morning after the diagnosis and told me perfectly steady, "We're going to handle this together, Russell. Same as everything else." There was a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart and entirely to do with it. I got up, went back to the counter, and picked up the wooden spoon because the filling still needed spicing and the oven still needed heat, and the work wasn't going to finish itself. That's what you do. Evelyn showed me that. I got the pie into the oven and set the timer. Then I took Owen and Nora's wrapped gifts down the hall to the spare room and slid them onto a shelf. Another occasion would come. By 4 o'clock, the pie had moved to the wire rack by the window, filling the kitchen, with a smell I'd known my entire adult life. I stood at the doorway looking at it, and the only thought I had was, well, there it is. I had no idea what the night was about to hand me. No idea that by 9 I'd be on the couch with my phone in my lap, staring at something that would sharpen that dull ache into something with an edge, not the slow spread of it, but a clean cut. I poured, clear's throat, myself a coffee and settled in with nowhere to be. Through the window, the November sky had gone the color of old pewter, and the kids next door were working through a pile of leaves in the fading light, laughing at something easy and unbothered. I watched them a while, finished the coffee. Then just after dark, a notification glowed on the end table. Nathan's wife's social media. Part of me considered ignoring it. I didn't ignore it. I'd like to say I kept scrolling, that I had the dignity to set the phone face down and go to bed at a reasonable hour. That is not what I did. The picture came in slowly, the way they do on an older handset building, top to bottom color, seeping into shape. I knew Nathan and Brianna's living room the moment it resolved. The vaulted ceilings, the recessed lighting they'd had installed last spring, the long walnut dining table that Brianna had picked out, and that I'd helped carry up 2 flights of stairs on a Saturday afternoon without being asked. It was beautifully arranged. Candles, pressed cloth napkins folded into fans, a centerpiece made of dried eucalyptus, and amber candles, and everywhere people. More than I expected, I tallied them reflexively, the way you do when you've spent a career sizing up rooms. 22, maybe more. Women clustered near the fireplace, wine in hand, in dresses that ran to more than my truck payment. Men in blazers' sleeves pushed up the carefully constructed look of people who wanted to seem as though they hadn't thought about it at all. One face I didn't know, a younger man, maybe 30, laughing at something Brianna was saying. The caption named him as Bryce, our incredible wellness coach, who keeps this family sane. I read the words, "this family," twice. Before I even registered what I was doing, my thumb had already swiped to the next picture. The food spread. Roasted turkey, glazed sweet potatoes, a row of salads plated so deliberately they belonged in a magazine. Brianna occupied the center of the frame, wearing a forest green dress, hair perfect, her smile broader than anything I'd witnessed in the 11 years she'd been part of this family. And positioned right at the front of that table, elevated on a white ceramic stand, as though the whole evening had been arranged around it, a pumpkin pie. Deep golden brown surface, perfectly smooth, that telltale caramel dark ring hugging the crust that only appears when someone has the sugar ratio dialed in exactly right. The same pie I had pulled from my oven that very morning, left to cool on a wire rack back in my kitchen on Birchwood Lane. I felt my spine straighten. Brianna's caption, "So grateful for this beautiful evening with incredible people, made with love using our family's secret recipe passed down through generations. Some traditions are worth holding on to." Our family's secret recipe. I bore down on the edge of the screen with my thumb until the knuckle drained of color. That recipe had come down to Evelyn through her grandmother. For 30 years, she'd been quietly refining it, a pinch of cardamom folded in somewhere in the last decade, a tweak to the brown-to-white sugar ratio. She never passed it on, always meant to write it down, and kept deferring the moment until the moment was no longer available. So I had rebuilt it on my own from what memory I had left of watching her work, one failed batch, then another, pressing forward. Because surrendering the recipe meant surrendering another fragment of her. 18 months back, Brianna had invited me to make the pie at their place for Christmas. She had planted herself at my elbow the entire time, a steady stream of questions coming. How much cinnamon goes in? What temperature does the oven want to be? What's the case for evaporated milk over fresh? Every question got a patient, willing answer. I was glad she was asking. I took it as interest, as a desire to carry something forward. "Dad," I said to the silence of my living room, to no one at all. "You absolute fool." Heat rose behind my eyes. Not tears, not quite yet. That preliminary pressure, the kind that settles into your sinuses and your throat simultaneously, the kind that turns the simple act of swallowing into something you have to think about. I kept scrolling anyway. Apparently, once I'd begun, I was going to see it through. A short video, next 40 seconds at most. Brianna working the room, laughing, swinging the camera toward various faces, then a beat where something changed. Maybe she lost track of the recording. Maybe it simply stopped mattering to her. She drifted toward the hallway entrance and fell into conversation with two women I had never seen before. "Is his father not here?" one of them asked. Casual, friendly, harmless. The shape of Brianna's smile adjusted, softened, took on a faint apologetic quality. "Oh, we've had a complicated few months with him. He's at a stage in life where big gatherings aren't really comfortable for him anymore. He tends to get a bit—" She paused, tilting her head, reaching for the word. "Overwhelmed. And honestly, he still talks about rewiring circuit breakers at the dinner table." A laugh, unforced, easy. You know how it is. Both women laughed with her. I hit stop. My hands had begun to tremble. Not the white-knuckled kind. Nothing dramatic, no fist meeting a table, no voice raising. More the tremor that moves into your fingers after you have held a grip too long and finally release it. Nearly invisible. Barely there. The kind of thing a body produces when it is catching up to information the mind hasn't fully absorbed yet. Nathan was in the background of the frame the whole time. 6 feet from Brianna, maybe. Glass raised mid-conversation with some other man near enough that not one word she spoke could have escaped him. He never glanced over. Never paused. Just kept on as if nothing had happened, because for him, nothing had. I laid the phone face down on the end table. Around me, the room settled into quiet. The furnace ticked in the way November always drew out of it, old pipes marking time with their familiar knock. On the mantel, the photograph of Evelyn and me at Niagara Falls, 1997. Both of us squinting hard against the sun, laughing at something that had evaporated from memory long before she did. The particular laugh of being 41 and sharing a future you believe is still wide open. I brought the heel of my hand up and pressed it against my chest. Nothing medical, just the instinct to apply pressure to the part of you that aches. Evelyn, I said to the photograph voice coming out scraped and overloud. They put your recipe on the table, claimed it as theirs. I released a breath that came out slow and uneven. I had no idea yet what I intended to do. About the pie, the party, the 22 guests, the wellness coach, the 30 years of Thanksgiving that had just been folded into a social media caption with someone else's name on it. That answer wasn't in me yet. What was in me, I was 68 years old. Retired. 2 Christmas gifts were wrapped and waiting in the spare room for grandchildren who'd been told I was too unwell to join the table. I knew that call was coming the next morning before the coffee had finished, and that the voice would belong to a 9-year-old carrying a worry that children shouldn't have to carry, the kind that plants itself when an adult's explanation doesn't quite add up. I couldn't have known it then. I clicked off the lamp and let the dark hold me for a stretch. Evelyn had lined 6 potted plants along the kitchen windowsill. Peace lilies, mostly, with one stubborn little cactus she'd rescued from a clearance rack at the hardware store and named Benny. 6 years I had kept that entire collection alive, armed with nothing but persistence and a watering schedule scratched on a post-it and fixed to the cabinet door. Benny, against all reasonable expectation, had begun genuinely thriving, something Evelyn would have found both deeply satisfying and slightly hilarious. I was misting the peace lilies that Friday morning when my iPad chimed on the counter. FaceTime. I glanced at the screen and felt a knot release somewhere in my chest. Owen. My grandson. 9 years old, 3rd grade, the kind of boy who could dismantle anything with moving parts, and was unshakably certain that his grandfather was the most fascinating human alive, a conviction I had worked hard not to undermine. I wiped my hands and answered. He filled the screen full cheeks. His father's eyes a smear of what looked like grape jelly at the corner of his mouth that he hadn't noticed and wouldn't. Hey, buddy? The smile I gave him was genuine, the unguarded kind that arrives before you've had a chance to arrange your face. Happy day after Thanksgiving. Hi, Grandpa. His nose wrinkled. Are you feeling better? The smile stayed where it was, while something beneath it went completely still. Feeling better. I kept the words measured, careful. What are you talking about, bud? Dad said you were sick. Owen tilted the iPad, and for a second, I was looking at the ceiling of his bedroom. He said whatever you had was contagious. That's why you couldn't make it. He said we had to stay away so none of us caught it. The misting bottle was still in my grip. I placed it on the counter slowly with great deliberate attention, the way you handle things when you no longer fully trust your own hands. Owen. Easy voice, warm voice. the one reserved for big explanations delivered small. I need you to hear me on something. I am not sick. There's nothing wrong with me. I have been perfectly fine. His face drew together. He was 9, but there was nothing uncomplicated about the way he thought. So why weren't you there? My throat closed around the next words hard enough that I had to work to get them out. Your dad and I had a mix-up, I told him. Grown-up stuff, nothing you have to carry around. I'll bring your Christmas present over soon. The one I think you're really going to love. Something unlocked in his expression instantly, that seamless leap from troubled to lit up that children make without any visible transition. Is it the remote control truck set? I laughed. It came from somewhere genuine, somewhere down low. You're going to have to wait and see. He pushed his face close to the camera, and his whole manner shifted into that concentrated seriousness children put on when something has become important to them. I missed you yesterday. My eyes went hot and quick. I pressed my lips flat and held them there until the wave receded enough that my voice would work. I missed you too, bud, I said. More than you know. After the call ended, I stayed at the counter with both palms laid flat on the tile, not moving, looking at nothing. The peace lilies wanted another spray. Benny held his corner absurdly green and healthy. Nathan had constructed a story for his own children, for Owen and Nora. A story about contagion and distance and medical necessity, tidy enough that a 9-year-old would accept it and ask no harder questions. That wasn't an accident. Nobody drifts accidentally into the language of symptoms when they're explaining a grandfather's absence to a small child. That was a decision. You think about it first. You choose it. I picked up my phone and pulled up Brianna's social media page. The video was still there, the same 40-second clip from the night before. The one where Brianna told 2 women she'd never introduced me to that I got overstimulated at gatherings and still brought up electrical panels at the dinner table. I watched it a second time. This time my eyes stayed on Nathan. 6 feet back in the frame, glass in hand, carrying on a conversation with another man. Near enough that every word she said had to reach him. He never looked over. No pause, no flicker of discomfort. He kept right on talking and laughing, a man with absolutely nothing weighing on him. Something gave way inside me. Not dramatically, nothing sudden. The way old timber splits in a cold snap, a sound so quiet, it lives only inside you. This wasn't a son caught between 2 loyalties trying to hold both sides together. This was a man who had picked a direction, done it with full awareness, and settled comfortably into the life that choice had made. I set the phone down, walked to the kitchen, drew out a chair, and lowered myself into it. Through the window, the Friday morning neighborhood was running its usual routines. Someone reversing a car down a driveway, a dog announcing itself 2 houses away. Everything outside proceeding with complete indifference to what was unfolding in my kitchen. I tried to think through what came next. Not in any heightened sense, no ultimatums taking shape, no speech assembling itself somewhere in the back of my mind. Just the plain question facing a 68-year-old man alone in his kitchen the morning after Thanksgiving. What exactly do you do now? I settled on doing nothing. Not yet. I would sit with it. I would see whether Nathan reached out, whether any kind of apology materialized. I gave it 3 days. He called on the 3rd day, and an apology was nowhere in it. 3 days of quiet passed the way December mornings pass in Akron slate skies, bare branches, the particular hush of a neighborhood that has already cleared away its holiday decorations and is simply waiting for winter to commit. I told myself Nathan would call when he found his footing. I mostly believed that. Then Tuesday afternoon, while I stood at the stove pushing soup around a pot, his name appeared on my screen. I turned the heat down and answered before the second ring, because whatever I was carrying, I was still his father and father's answer. "Hey, Nathan." "Dad." His voice was flat. Not the flat of anger, the flat of someone conveying a prepared set of facts, the tone of a man who had already organized this into an agenda before he dialed. "I need to talk to you about something." "All right." I moved the pot off the burner entirely and braced against the counter. "Go ahead." "We're behind on the mortgage." No warm-up, no cushioning, just the information dropped into the middle of the call like something dense placed on fragile glass. 3 months behind, and with the late fees and the property tax coming due, we're looking at $1,800. We need it by Friday or the bank opens a formal default. I didn't reply immediately, not from having nothing to say, but because I was doing the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was producing a familiar tightening at the back of my throat. "What happened with the payments?" My voice came out more level than I'd expected it to. "We had some unexpected costs come up," said in the deliberate way of someone who has decided in advance not to go further. "What kind of costs, Nathan?" "Just things. The dinner ran expensive. There were other commitments." A beat. "Dad, I don't have time to walk through all of it right now. We need the money by Friday." While he was still talking, my phone buzzed against my ear, a text arriving mid-call. I pulled it back just long enough to read the screen. Brianna. Her message: "You co-signed the loan 4 years ago. That makes this your legal obligation too. If the mortgage goes into default, it doesn't just hurt us, it damages your credit score as well. We need the transfer by Friday. This is not optional." I read it through twice. Then I brought the phone back to my ear. Here is something a lot of people never fully reckon with about co-signing a loan. When you add your name to someone else's mortgage as a guarantor, you are making a promise to the bank that if the primary borrower stops paying, you will step in. Your financial history, your standing, your name, all of it becomes attached to that debt. Brianna had the mechanics exactly right. A default would mark my record, no question. What she was counting on was that I'd hear the word default and reach for my wallet without pausing to think past it. "Nathan," I said, "I'm going to need to call you back." "Dad." "I'll call you back." I kept my voice steady, the same measured register I used on job sites when something had gone sideways, and a level head was the only tool that mattered. "Give me a little while." I ended the call, set the phone on the table, and opened my banking app not to move a single dollar, but to look at something I'd been avoiding, examining as a whole. 3 years of transactions. Every time Nathan had phoned with something he needed, and I had found a way to say yes. Roof work on the Fairlawn Heights house, $12,000. A credit card balance described as temporary $4,300. New kitchen appliances, because the ones that came with the house weren't up to standard $6,800. Smaller amounts scattered throughout too. Grocery shortfalls, a car registration, a weekend trip Brianna had already booked before they'd noticed they couldn't cover it. The rough sum sat at the bottom of my tally like a weight. $72,000 give or take. And that figure didn't include the $120,000 I'd contributed toward the down payment or the years I'd spent as their co-signer, keeping my own credit in order so theirs could stay serviceable. I put the phone face down on the table. Then I looked up at the small framed photograph Evelyn had kept on the windowsill, the two of us flanking Nathan at his college graduation, all 3 of us squinting into bright sun. Nathan was 22 in that picture, smiling with the confidence of a man who believes the rest of his life has just been handed to him. "What would you do?" I said to her aloud, the way I sometimes did when the kitchen felt too still. "What would you be telling me right now?" She didn't answer, of course. But I knew Evelyn well enough to know she wouldn't have said to wire the money by Friday. She would have told me to slow down and think it through. She would have said, "Russell, don't react. Assess." So I sat there and did exactly that. And what I arrived at, gradually the way cold water settles to its own level, was a growing awareness that something here didn't hold together. 3 months of missed mortgage payments, while they'd hosted a 20-person Thanksgiving with catered food and a wellness coach on the guest list. 3 months of silence, while the bank presumably had been sending notices that never reached me. I was going to need to make some calls. But not to Nathan. Not yet. First, I was going to the bank. I put in 31 years as an electrician. That work teaches you certain things that don't leave you when the tool belt comes off. The most fundamental of them is this: before you touch anything, you check the circuit. You do not go on assumption. You do not trust instinct over evidence. You verify. So Wednesday morning, I pulled on my good coat, drove the 12 minutes to the Keystone Federal Bank branch on West Market Street, and asked for Donna Caldridge. Donna had been at that branch going on 19 years. Her husband and she had lived 2 streets over from Evelyn and me for a stretch before they relocated to Hudson, and through enough shared years and crossed paths, a quiet familiarity had developed between us. The kind that doesn't ask you to catch up, just assumes you're both people who mean what they say. She had handled the paperwork when Evelyn and I refinanced years back, and she'd been the loan officer who processed Nathan's mortgage 4 years ago, when I came in to co-sign. When I told the woman at the front desk I was there to see her, she disappeared into the back and returned in under 2 minutes. Donna came out herself, hand extended, studying my face with the practiced calm of someone who has spent 2 decades watching people walk into banks carrying weight they haven't yet found words for. "Russell," she shook my hand without hesitation. "Come on back." The office was small, orderly. Her grandchildren looked out from frames on the credenza. A coffee maker sat on a side table and she pointed toward it without making a question out of it. I poured a cup and took the chair across from her desk. "So I need to look at the co-signer record on my son's mortgage," I said. "The one I signed 4 years ago. I want to see the payment history, and I want to know whether the bank's notifications have actually been reaching me." Donna pulled the account up without hesitation. She angled the screen enough that I could see the general layout, though the specific figures stayed on her side of the desk. "Privacy protocols." "Payment history first," she said. Her voice held steady, but the way her eyes tracked across the screen made my stomach drop before she said a word. "Russell, this loan has been delinquent for 3 consecutive months, September, October, November. The total outstanding, including late fees and accrued interest, is currently—" She stopped. The pause itself told me something. "Just over 14,000. The property tax installment due in December would bring that figure closer to 18. "I know about the 18, I said. "My son called yesterday." Donna nodded. "What I suspect you don't know," she said carefully, "which is why you weren't notified sooner." She clicked through something scrolled and paused. Her expression changed, not dramatically, but the way a face changes when a person finds what they were already half expecting and half hoping wouldn't be there. "The cosigner notification email on this account was updated approximately 4 months ago. The address currently on file is," she read it aloud, "R. Hadley, 1955, updates@gmail.com. I came forward in my seat. "That's not my email." "I didn't think so." She said it quietly. "What address do you actually have on record for me?" She read back the one I'd been using for 12 years. The one Nathan had helped me set up on a Sunday afternoon at my kitchen table back when Sunday dinners were still something he showed up for. "Who made the change?" I asked. My voice stayed even. Under the desk, my left hand was bearing down hard against my own thigh. Donna turned back to her screen. The modification came through the online cosigner portal, she said. The access log shows it was authenticated via a linked phone number. Another pause. The number on file for that authentication is, and she read it to me, Nathan's cell. The same number I dialed a couple hundred times. The same number that had called me just yesterday afternoon to request $8,400. The coffee cup in my right hand turned very heavy all at once. I set it on the edge of her desk carefully because my fingers had gone the particular kind of numb that comes when your body has already understood something your mind is still a few beats behind on. Donna, I said. One more question. Is there anything in the transaction record tied to this account, anything at all, that might explain why 3 months of mortgage payments weren't made? She went quiet for a moment, assembling her words the way deliberate people do when they mean to be truthful without crossing a line they're not authorized to cross. What I can tell you, she said slowly, is that the account associated with the primary borrower shows activity consistent with significant discretionary spending during the same period the mortgage fell delinquent. I can't give you specific figures or transaction details. That's the primary borrower's private information. She looked at me directly. What I can tell you is that the October activity included a large single purchase consistent with a vehicle acquisition. A significant one. I thought of the photo Brianna had posted back in October. A white Lexus SUV parked in their driveway, the caption reading, "Finally treating ourselves." Something cold passed through me. Russell. Donna folded her hands on the desk. Her voice dropped half a register the way it does when a conversation crosses from professional into something more personal. I would strongly recommend speaking with an attorney before you make any financial decisions. She held my gaze. And I want you to know I'll be watching this account closely. If anything else comes across my desk that concerns me, I'll reach out. I appreciate that, I said, and the words didn't come close to covering what I actually meant. I thanked her and walked out through the lobby into the December cold. I sat in my truck for a full 5 minutes before I turned the key. Not because I lacked direction, because I needed to let the whole shape of it settle: the changed email, the missed payments, the SUV, the Thanksgiving party, and underneath all of it, Nathan's phone number sitting in an audit log like a signature on something he never expected anyone to read. Someone had taken deliberate steps to make sure I wouldn't find out until it was already too late. The drive home was 12 minutes. I spent 11 of them thinking. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had arrived at exactly 2 decisions. The first was to call Stu Benwick first thing in the morning. The second was that I was finished waiting to figure out what was being done to me. It was time to move. Stu Benwick had been my attorney for 11 years. I'd brought him in when Evelyn and I updated our wills, and again when a contractor dispute over roof work needed sorting. He was the kind of lawyer who never used 3 sentences where one would serve, who never told you what you wanted to hear, and who charged a fair price for exactly that quality. I called him Thursday morning at 8:15, and by 8:45 I had a precise picture of what I was legally entitled to do. What I could do turned out to be more than I'd expected. As the co-signer on Nathan's mortgage, I had every right to contact the lender directly about the loan's standing. I could place a notation on the account requiring in-person verification for any future changes to co-signer contact information. The credit card that carried Nathan's name but mine as the primary holder, I could cancel that with a single call. The emergency savings account I'd established years ago with Nathan as an authorized user, I could pull that access without needing anyone's permission or a court order. I wrote down each step in the order I'd take them. Then I opened my banking app. The transfer screen appeared. Recipient Nathan Hadley. Amount field blinking empty. I typed the number $1. In the memo line, I wrote contribution from someone who is apparently not considered family. My thumb sat over the confirm button for a long moment. Not from uncertainty, but because I understood that once I pressed it, something between Nathan and me was going to shift into a configuration that couldn't be quietly undone. I pressed it anyway. Then I called the credit card company and canceled the card in Nathan's name. I called my bank and revoked his authorized user access to the emergency account. I called Keystone Federal Bank and spoke to Donna directly requesting a security notation requiring my physical presence and government ID before any future changes could be made to co-signer contact information. Donna processed it without a single question, which told me she'd already been half waiting for the call. I had just refilled my coffee when my phone rang so abruptly it nearly slid off the counter. "Nathan, what is this?" His voice was tight and hot, nothing like the flat, business-like tone from Tuesday. $1? You sent me $1. I did, I said. Are you serious right now? Are you actually serious? I heard him pull a sharp breath. You're going to let us lose the house over a dinner. Over one dinner. You're not losing the house over a dinner, Nathan. I kept my voice measured and deliberate, the register I used on job sites when things had gone wrong and someone was about to compound the damage. You've been behind on the mortgage for 3 months. That has nothing to do with Thanksgiving. You canceled my card. You pulled the emergency account. His voice cracked raw and furious. Do you have any idea what you're doing to us right now? I'm doing exactly what I should have done a long time ago. That is unbelievable. A pause, and then something shifted in the way he was speaking. It moved from hot to calculated, the way a fire transitions from open flame to something slower and harder to put out. Fine. Fine, Dad. You want to play it this way? If we lose that house, when we lose that house, I will make sure Owen and Nora know exactly what happened. I will tell them their grandfather had the money and chose to let their family get thrown out onto the street. I will make sure they know that. The words landed like a hand closing around my throat. Owen, 9 years old, grape jelly at the corner of his mouth, asking me over FaceTime if I was feeling better. Nora, 6, who called me Grandpa Russ and still couldn't quite get her R's out right. My grandchildren, the 2 people in this entire situation who had done absolutely nothing wrong, and Nathan had just reached down, picked them up, and positioned them between us like a pair of shields. My eyes burned fierce and sudden. My free hand found the kitchen counter and pressed flat against it, the cold of the tile anchoring me where I stood. Goodbye, Nathan, I said. No tremor in my voice. I'm proud of that. I ended the call, a few seconds just breathing. Then I picked the phone back up and found a different number. Craig, a locksmith I'd called on twice over the years, a one-man outfit he ran from a shop off Lover's Lane Road. Craig, Russell, Hadley, here Birchwood Lane. Every lock on this house needs to go today. Front back garage door into the house, the side entry by the laundry, every last one. And put a deadbolt keypad on the front. A short pause on his end. Lock yourself out. Nothing like that, I said. I just need to be the one holding the answer to who comes through. He was at my door 2 hours later. While Craig worked, I went back to the spare room and looked for the key I'd handed Nathan years before. What I found instead was the bare hook on the keyboard where it used to hang before he'd borrowed it quietly and had a copy made without a word. Behind the ceramic pot at the base of the front steps, where I'd stashed a spare for genuine emergencies, I found that one too and slid it into my pocket. Craig wrapped up just past 3:00 that afternoon and set 2 fresh keys in my outstretched hand, small things sharp-edged with a satisfying weight. Good to go, he said. Nobody walks in unless you give them cause to. That's the whole point, I told him. When he was gone, I stood alone in the front entry. Late afternoon sun slanted in through the narrow windows flanking the door, catching the new brass of the deadbolt and bouncing it back clean and bright. 26 years I had lived inside this house. My son had grown up within these walls. I had brought Evelyn home from her final hospital stay to this very threshold and carried her through it the day her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Standing there in that hallway for the first time in more years than I could honestly reckon, the place felt wholly and completely mine. I had no way of knowing yet what morning would deliver. I told myself I'd gained a little breathing room, days maybe enough to think clearly enough to map out what came next. I half expected Nathan to settle down, and for the two of us to eventually sit down together like reasonable men. I was wrong on both. They were back the very next day, and they hadn't come on their own. Friday broke cold and overcast, one of those December mornings that lays itself over the whole world like a weight, flattening the rooftops, the stripped trees, the silent street, as though the sky itself were trying to hold everything down. I'd brewed coffee and was at the kitchen window watching two sparrows bicker above an empty feeder when the sound reached me, a key scraping at a lock it no longer matched. Small sound that. A scratch, a jingle, the maddening rhythm of someone feeding the same key in over and over, certain it will eventually work. Then came the knock, except it wasn't a knock. It was a fist, hard and flat, the kind that isn't making a request. Dad. Nathan's voice through the new steel door, slightly muffled. Dad, come on, open up. I set down my mug and made my way to the entry. I did not touch the door. I stood back far enough to watch the doorbell camera feed on my phone. I'd brought it up the moment I heard that first scrape. Nathan stood to the left. Brianna to the right, arms folded over her chest, jaw-locked eyes already sweeping the porch and the sidewalk beyond, tallying witnesses, working out how the scene would read. I can hear you, I said through the door. Then open it. Nathan's voice had gone thin, stretched over something I couldn't cleanly name, anger maybe, or something that lived right next door to it. Something more like shame. Hard to separate them from this side of the door. I'd rather not. Dad, you're being ridiculous. Brianna's voice came in over his sharper cleaner, a fresh edge against a dull one. Your own son is standing outside the house where he grew up, and you're refusing to let him in. This house is mine, I said, keeping my tone level. It has always been mine. Nathan was raised here, that's a true thing. But it is not the same thing as this being his home. Some of his things are still in there. Her angle had shifted. I could feel the recalculation in it. As the only child, he has an interest. Brianna, once, flat, final. No adult child holds a legal claim to enter a parent's private home without being asked. That isn't how property law functions in Ohio or in any other state. A beat of silence, genuine, caught off guard, quiet. Then Nathan, his voice lower, something almost pleading working into it. Dad, just step to the door. We can talk. Well, we are talking. Open it and talk to us. No. From the other side, I heard Brianna exhale, measured, deliberate, the breath of someone adjusting strategy mid-course. Heels clicked against porch boards as she stepped back. Then the soft, rapid tapping of a phone screen. Fine. One word. She loaded it with something cold and considered, and the hair lifted on the back of my neck. If you're determined to be unreasonable, we'll find someone with the authority to step in. 12 minutes later, the microwave clock confirmed it. A black and white cruiser eased up to the curb. Two officers climbed out. Officer Tatum, a woman somewhere in her early 40s, whose face had the settled calm of someone not easily rattled by what she sees, and Officer Vega, thicker through the shoulders, maybe 35, who fell in a half step behind and let her take point. I tracked them on the camera feed, watched Brianna hold the floor for about 90 seconds, and then watched Officer Tatum nod once and approach. She knocked crisply, without urgency, a sound nothing like what had been hitting that door earlier. I swung it open. "Good morning, sir." Her gaze swept across me once quick, practiced no performance in it. The habit of someone whose job is reading people before they've introduced themselves. "Officer Tatum, Akron PD. We got a call, a welfare concern. Would you mind if I asked you a couple of questions?" "Not at all," I said. "Come in out of the cold." She crossed the threshold. Vega settled on the porch behind her, angling himself casually into the gap between the door and wherever Nathan and Brianna had planted themselves. Smart positioning. "Can you verify for me that this property is yours?" she asked. "I can do that." I crossed to the small hallway desk and pulled out the folder I'd assembled the afternoon before, deed utility statements under my name, my ID. I handed it over. She took her time with it, unhurried. "And the locks, you had those replaced yesterday." "My house. My call on who enters it." She nodded, no pushback. "The people outside say they're concerned that you may be having some trouble with cognition, acting out of character." She delivered it without editorial, the neutral tone of someone laying a claim on the table before deciding whether to pick it up. "Is there something you want to say about that?" Almost smiled. "I changed my locks and sent my son a text he took badly," I said. "I'm genuinely uncertain which of those is the erratic behavior. But if there's a statute that covers it, I'm all ears." Something passed through Officer Tatum's expression. Not a smile exactly, but the careful holding back of one. She turned, walked back to the door, and stepped onto the porch. I moved up to the frame. She spoke to Brianna directly. "Ma'am, Mr. Hadley holds clear title to this property. He's shown full awareness of both his situation and his legal rights. Repaying a home and managing who has access to it don't constitute evidence of diminished capacity." A pause. "Do you or your husband have a current address here?" Brianna's chin lifted. "No, but then there isn't anything we can do here. Mr. Hadley has broken no law." Nathan's face went slack around the edges, the way paper softens when it absorbs water. His mouth opened, then shut. His eyes dropped to the ground. Brianna held herself together completely. She pivoted toward me with the composed, banked fury of a woman who understood that surrendering this skirmish was not surrendering the fight. She closed the distance between us enough that Vega shifted his footing slightly, attention sharpening, and brought her voice down close, barely above a murmur. "You think you've won something," she said. Her eyes didn't waver, not even a flicker. "You haven't. You've just made this harder than it needed to be, and you are going to regret making us look foolish in front of the whole neighborhood." One more beat of eye contact. Then she took Nathan by the arm and led him back to the car. Officer Tatum stood with me until the vehicle had gone. Then she turned, and what was in her face now was no longer the neutral mask of procedure. It was something quieter, something personal, the look of a woman who had seen this particular shape of thing before and knew what it usually meant. "Sir, she said, her voice low, "if the situation shifts, if you feel any kind of pressure, anything that doesn't sit right, please reach out." A pause. "Some situations like this have a way of escalating before they resolve." I appreciate that, I told her. And the way she'd phrased it, escalating before they resolved, settled into me like a stone dropped into still water, the rings moving outward and outward. I closed the door, put my back against it, and pressed one hand flat to my chest, pushing against the tight, burning weight that had made itself at home there. Brianna had told me I was going to regret this. She hadn't said it the way someone says things when they're venting. She'd said it the way someone speaks when they're reading from a script they've already written. 2 days later, I began to understand what she meant. Sunday morning, I walked out to the mailbox in my bathrobe. 30 years of that same habit. Evelyn used to ride me about it without mercy, said the neighbors would start leaving cups of coffee on their front porches out of pity. I always told her the neighbors could keep their opinions to themselves, which unfailingly made her laugh. I pulled out the usual Sunday haul, a grocery circular, an electric bill, a Christmas catalog from some company I'd never purchased a thing from. And then, at the bottom of the stack, a white envelope. Return address, Akron Cognitive Health Center, printed in small blue letters across the upper left corner. I stood at the foot of my driveway in my bathrobe holding that envelope, while the December wind worked its way under my collar. My fingers went cold. Not from the weather. I opened it right there on the spot. Dear Mr. Russell Hadley, a cognitive wellness evaluation has been scheduled on your behalf by a family member concerned about your well-being. Your appointment is confirmed for Tuesday, December 10th at 10:00 a.m. Please contact our office to confirm attendance or to arrange transportation if needed. I read it through twice. Then I refolded it along the same crease, brought it inside, and set it on the kitchen table. I put the kettle on because I needed my hands occupied, while the rest of me caught up to what my body had already worked out. I called the center the moment they opened at 9. The woman who answered had a pleasant, unhurried manner, the kind of voice suited to a medical office, warm without crossing into familiar. Yes, Mr. Hadley. You are in our system. The appointment had been booked on Thursday, December 5th, the same day I'd canceled Nathan's card and sent the $1 transfer. The referring family member is listed as Nathan Hadley, your son. What reason did he give for the referral? My voice held steadier than I had any right to expect. My free hand was flat on the kitchen table, fingers spread wide like I needed the surface to stay fixed beneath me. The soft click of a keyboard. Then a pause. The intake notes indicate another brief pause, reported instances of the patient forgetting familiar routes, making unusual financial decisions, and exhibiting what the referring party described as paranoid behavior, including changing household locks without cause and refusing entry to immediate family. The kettle started to whistle. I didn't move to take it off. Sending $1 to my own son, that was an unusual financial decision. Rekeying my house after learning my son had altered my banking records without my knowledge, that was paranoid behavior. Standing in my own doorway and declining to admit 2 people who had spent the previous week making a spectacle of me, that was refusing entry to immediate family. Every single action I had taken to look after myself had been catalogued as proof that I was no longer capable of looking after myself. I lifted the kettle off the heat. I poured the water. I sat at the table and held the mug in both hands, letting the warmth reach into my palms, because the rest of me had gone very cold. Here is what I knew about guardianship proceedings in Ohio, because Stu had walked me through it once years back in an entirely different context, when a client of his was navigating the situation with an elderly parent. To obtain legal guardianship over another adult, meaning the court strips that person of the right to direct their own financial and personal affairs, you first need medical documentation suggesting the person lacks capacity. You get that documentation by having them evaluated. Then you file a petition with the probate court. A judge reviews the evidence. If it's compelling enough, a guardian is appointed. It is not a quick process. It is not a guaranteed one. But it begins with a piece of paper from a doctor's office, and someone had just tried to put that first piece of paper in motion. My chest carried a dull, heavy pressure that had nothing to do with my heart and everything to do with it. Not rage was too clean, too straightforward for what was moving through me. This was something older than that and more tangled. The feeling of a man who has spent 68 years trying to be decent, to be reliable, to be the kind of person whose word meant something, sitting at his own kitchen table, reading documents engineered to persuade a court that he is none of those things. I called Stu at 9:45. He picked up on the second ring. Stu. I gave him the details of the letter, flat factual, the way he had always taught me to deliver information. When I finished, there was a short silence. The quiet of a man sorting through his thoughts at speed. Okay, he said. This is serious, Russell, but it's not insurmountable. A single evaluation request from one family member doesn't establish incapacity. Not even close. His voice shifted, carrying the weight of something that needed carrying. But it does mean someone has started laying a foundation, and we need to get out in front of it. How? You come in tomorrow morning. We go through everything from the start. The email, the account changes, the $1 transfer, all of it. I want the full picture before we move anywhere. A pause. And Russell, don't go to that appointment. Don't have any contact with their office at all until we've talked. Can you hold on that? Yes, I said. Good. Another brief pause, and then almost carefully, there's something else I want to look into before we sit down. Something I came across this morning while I was going through the co-signer paperwork you sent over. I want to be certain of what I'm looking at before I say anything. His voice had a precision to it that turned my stomach. Come in at 9:00. We'll go through everything. I said I would. I thanked him. I put the phone down. Outside, the Sunday neighborhood was going on with its Sunday business. A car reversing slowly down the driveway. A child on a bicycle threading along the sidewalk. Smoke rising from a chimney 2 doors down. The world entirely unconcerned with the fact that someone had spent the better part of a week building a case document by document that Russell Hadley of Birchwood Lane was no longer fit to run his own life. I looked at the envelope on the kitchen table one last time. Then I slid it into the folder with everything else. Tomorrow morning, Stu had something to show me. And the way he'd said it, I want to be certain of what I'm looking at before I say anything, told me that whatever it was going to shift the shape of everything I thought I already understood. Stu Benwick has a way of preparing his desk before a difficult conversation. He clears it not entirely, but enough. Coffee moved to the left corner. Whatever folder he's working from aligned parallel to the edge. Then his hands folded on top of it, and he waits for you to settle into your seat before he opens his mouth. In 11 years of working with him, I had come to understand that the tidier his desk, the heavier what was about to come out of it. Monday morning, his desk was very clean. Before we begin, I said, hanging my coat on the hook by the door, I want to know how you came to have whatever you're about to show me. Said Donna called me Friday afternoon. He said it after you left the bank she'd come across something in the system that she felt was beyond her authority to handle on her own, but she couldn't in good conscience leave it alone either. He opened the folder. She forwarded a copy through the proper inter-institutional channel. I spent the weekend confirming what I was looking at. He turned the folder around and slid it across the desk toward me. It was a loan application. A refinancing request on the Fairlawn Heights property, the house I had co-signed 4 years ago. The house Nathan and Brianna lived in. What I was about to find out would reframe everything, every phone call, every document, every silence I had let pass without question. Before we get there, I want to ask you something. If you slowly realized that someone close to you had been quietly working against you, would you confront them the moment you knew, or would you wait, gather everything, and let the truth speak for itself? The application was dated November 29th, the Friday after Thanksgiving. That same morning, Owen had FaceTimed me to ask whether I was feeling better. The primary borrower was listed as Nathan Hadley. The co-signer, the person whose agreement made the loan possible, was listed as Russell Hadley. The amount being borrowed ran $85 above the existing mortgage balance. I leaned in and studied the signature line at the bottom of the final page. The handwriting resembled mine, The way a photograph of a person resembles the person close enough to register different enough, if you knew what you were looking at, to know it wasn't real. The pen pressure was off. The loop on the capital R was too careful, like someone who had rehearsed it, but had never lived inside it for 68 years. "That's not my signature," I said, flat, certain, no hesitation. "I know," Stu said. "The address, phone number, and email on the co-signer line don't match your actual information either. They correspond to the fabricated contact details that were entered into the bank's co-signer portal." I settled back in the chair. The warmth of the office suddenly pressed in, as if the thermostat was running 3 degrees too high for the size of the room. I put 2 fingers against the side of my jaw and focused on breathing. "When was it submitted?" I asked. Stu checked his notes. "November 29th. 5 days before Nathan called me about the mortgage arrears." 5 days. I turned that over slowly, the way you turn a stone to see what's living underneath. "So they filed this first," I said, "and then called me about the $18,000. That's the sequence." The room held that fact for a moment. Then the shape of it came clear, not all at once, but the way a photograph develops in a dark room, details rising up from nothing into something you can no longer pretend isn't there. They had tried to attach my forged name to an $85,000 loan first. The refinancing application was already sitting in the system awaiting bank verification, but the fraud detection team at Keystone Federal Bank required direct in-person confirmation from the co-signer before releasing funds on a refinancing of this size. So the application stalled. Then they called me about the $18,000. Not because they were in genuine distress over the mortgage, because they needed to gauge whether I was still the kind of man who moved money without asking questions. They were testing whether I was still manageable, whether the version of me that had quietly written checks for 7 years was the version they were still dealing with. I had answered that question with $1 and a changed lock. "Stu." My voice held steady. My hands resting on my knees beneath the desk were pressing hard into my own legs. "This is fraud. Federal bank fraud. Forgery. It is," he said plainly, without any embellishment. "And it is serious." He let that settle. "The application hasn't been funded. The in-person verification requirement stopped it before it could go anywhere. But the submission itself is a crime." He folded his hands on the desk. "Here's what I'd like to do this afternoon. If you're ready, I'd like to go to Keystone Federal Bank together. You file a formal report of unauthorized use of your identity, and we have the application flagged and frozen. Donna has already indicated she'll cooperate fully." "Yep," I said. "Let's go." We drove separately and met in the Keystone Federal Bank parking lot at 2 Drouin in the afternoon. Donna was waiting at the side entrance. She had briefed the branch manager ahead of time, and we were taken directly to a private conference room rather than seated at a public desk, smart, discreet. Donna walked us through what she'd found one step at a time, her voice measured and deliberate, her eyes moving between Stu and me, the way someone's eyes move when they need to be certain everyone in the room is following. The IP address tied to the online submission, she said, sliding a printed log across the table, traces to the residential router registered at the Fairlawn Heights address. The submission was made at 11:14 p.m. on November 29th. I thought about Brianna at 11 o'clock at night, in the house I had helped buy filing documents bearing my name while I sat in my living room with no knowledge that any of it was happening. My stomach turned over, slow and cold. I signed the fraud report. Stu filed the supporting documentation. Donna placed a permanent notation on my co-signer record, requiring biometric verification for any future changes. Before we left, she looked at me across the conference table with an expression that had moved past professional into something more direct. "Russell," she said quietly, Whoever provided the signature sample, they had access to something old, a document you'd signed years ago. The imitation is convincing enough that it cleared initial intake review. A pause. Someone close to you handed them that sample. I drove home with both hands on the wheel, moving slowly, running through who had access to old documents bearing my signature. Old tax records. Old cosigner paperwork from years back. Things that lived in filing cabinets in houses where I used to be welcome. I needed to speak with Nathan, not over the phone, in person. And I already knew what I was going to ask him. I called Nathan that evening and asked him to meet me for lunch the following day. Not at the house neutral ground, I said. A diner on Canton Road we used to go to together back when he was in high school, and thought his father understood everything and was only mildly embarrassed to be seen with me in public. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said yes. I arrived first, took the corner booth in the back, the one with the vinyl seat that had been patched with duct tape since at least 2007, ordered coffee, and waited. The place smelled exactly the way it always had: grilled onions and burnt toast and something that was somehow unmistakably the 1980s. I had always found that comforting. I wasn't sure I found it comforting today. Nathan came through the door at 12:15. He had the look of a man who hadn't slept properly in several nights, a hollowness around the eyes, a tightness in his jaw that didn't ease when he slid into the seat across from me. He ordered coffee and wrapped both hands around the mug the way people do when they're cold, even when the room isn't. "Thanks for coming," I said. He looked up. Something moved through his expression. Not quite guilt, not quite relief, but somewhere in the territory between them. "Yeah," he cleared his throat. "Of course." I didn't lead with the document. I waited. Let him settle. Let the coffee sit. Then I reached into my coat pocket and placed the copied loan application on the table between us, face up, the signature line in plain view. Nathan looked down at it. The color drained from his face so completely and so fast that I moved forward on instinct, the reflex you have towards someone who looks like they might fall, before I caught myself and pulled back. "Where did you get that?" His voice had dropped to nearly nothing. The bank found it," I said. "It was submitted November 29th, 5 days before you called me about the mortgage payment." Nathan stared at the page. His jaw shifted once, twice, like he was searching for a sentence that could account for what he was looking at and couldn't locate one. So, Nathan. I kept my voice quiet and level, no heat in it, because anger wasn't going to get me what I needed, which was the truth. "Is that my signature?" "No," he said, barely audible. "It's not." "Did you know this document existed before today?" A long pause. His grip on the coffee mug tightened until his knuckles went white. "No, I didn't know about the $85,000. I swear to you, Dad, I had no idea what she was submitting." He stopped. "But you gave her something," I said. "Donna told me the signature is convincing enough to have passed initial review. Whoever produced it was working from an original, a real sample. Something old." I watched his face. "Did you give Brianna copies of my identification, old documents with my signature on them?" Nathan closed his eyes. He pressed the heel of his hand hard against his forehead, grinding it there as if he could push something back inside. When he opened his eyes again, the rims were red, wet, and ashamed. "She told me the bank needed to verify the co-signer's identity for a routine extension," he said. "She said they needed a copy of your ID and a signature sample from existing paperwork to cross-reference. She told me it was standard procedure." His voice broke on those last two words. "I took photos of the old documents from the filing cabinet. Your driver's license copy, the original co-signer agreement from 4 years ago." My chest tightened, something winding down inside it, slow and deliberate. I breathed through it. "Did you read what she did with those documents?" I asked. "No." The word came out broken, like it had fallen from somewhere too high. I didn't ask. I didn't look. She told me it was routine, and He stopped, pressed his lips together hard. I didn't look, Dad. I sat with that for a moment. The diner carried on around us, a waitress topping off coffee at a nearby table, the cook shouting something back toward the counter. The ordinary Tuesday sounds of a place where ordinary things happened. I need you to understand something, I said at last. I'm not saying you designed this. I don't believe you understood what you were handing over. I held his gaze. But Nathan, there is a difference between not knowing and choosing not to look. You gave someone documents with my name and my identity on them, and she used them to forge my signature on a federal loan application. The fact that you didn't read what she intended to do with them. I exhaled slowly. That isn't innocence. That's a decision you made. His eyes filled. He blinked hard against it, his jaw working, and for a moment I thought he might break right there in that corner booth. Instead, he pressed both fists against his mouth and breathed through his nose, pulling himself back the particular way men collect themselves when they've been taught their whole lives that coming apart in public isn't allowed. What are you going to do? His voice was raw, scraped thin. I'm going to protect what's mine, I said. The way I should have done a long time ago. I picked up this document and slid it back into my coat. What you need to think about is what you're going to do. Because whatever Brianna built, she didn't build it by herself. She had help. I left enough on the table to cover both coffees and got to my feet. Nathan was still seated, both hands locked around a mug that had long since gone cold, eyes fixed on the table. At the door, I stopped and turned back once. I still love you, I said. That part hasn't changed. But love and accountability aren't the same thing. You're going to have to decide which one you're more comfortable living with. I stepped out into the December afternoon. Behind me, a son sat in a diner with a choice he hadn't finished making. Ahead of me, there was still a question Donna had raised that morning, one I hadn't been able to set down since she'd said it. Where had all that mortgage money actually gone? Donna called before I'd gotten through my second cup of coffee Wednesday morning. Can you come in? She said. There's something I need to walk you through face to face. I'd rather not put it in writing yet. That last part, I'd rather not put it in writing, yet told me everything I needed to know about what she'd found. I was in the car 15 minutes later. Her office felt smaller than usual when I arrived. Or perhaps it was the documents spread across her desk that made the air feel closer. She shut the door behind me and went straight to it, the way Donna always did. No small talk. No easing in just the facts arranged in the order they had to be understood. When you filed the fraud report Monday, she said, settling into her chair, it authorized our compliance team to pull the transaction history on the mortgage account and any linked accounts that touched the loan. Standard procedure in an active fraud investigation. She angled her monitor so I could see a column of figures without making out the account holder details. What we found is not what I expected. Tell me, I said. Every month for the past 8 months, the mortgage payment was moved from Nathan's household budget account into a personal account under Brianna's name on time, the right amount every single time. She paused to let that sit. That money never reached Keystone Federal Bank. Instead, within 48 hours of each transfer, Brianna's account sent the funds to a business account registered to a limited liability company called Bright Horizon Media. She slid a printed page across the desk. The Ohio Secretary of State registration for Bright Horizon Media LLC public record, available to anyone willing to look, filed 18 months ago. Listed business activity, digital marketing, and social media consulting. Registered agent and sole member Spencer Norrell with an address in the Kenmore neighborhood of Akron. Total transferred to Bright Horizon Media over 8 months. Donna said is $46,200. The number settled into my chest, the way something does when it's dropped from a height. 40x dollars 200. Not spent on groceries, not run up on credit cards the way young couples sometimes will transfer deliberately, methodically to a company. Has Bright Horizon Media provided any services to Nathan and Brianna? I asked. Contracts, invoices, anything in the file? Nothing. Donna's voice was dry and precise. No documentation of any services rendered has been submitted in connection with these transfers. I wrote the name Spencer Norrell on the small notepad I'd taken to carrying in my coat pocket 3 weeks earlier. I had filled more pages of that notepad than I cared to count. Do you know who he is? Donna asked. Not yet, I said, but I'm going to. I thanked her and drove across town to the Akron Summit County Public Library. Not my computer at home, not my phone, the library's public terminals. A man who has spent 3 weeks learning how carefully someone has been tracking his accounts does not leave search trails where they can be followed. I started with the Ohio Secretary of State business search. Bright Horizon Media active registration, no violations on record, no lawsuits filed. Then I ran Spencer Norrell's name through the publicly available court records portal. One minor civil dispute from 4 years back already resolved. Nothing recent. Nothing that pointed to a man quietly receiving $46,000 in unexplained transfers. Then I looked him up on social media using the library's guest login. His profile was sparse, a handful of posts, the most recent from 2 months ago. A photo of him at what appeared to be a neighborhood cookout. He looked to be around 32 or 33. Unremarkable. Nothing in his appearance or his posts suggested someone living off money that had been funneled to him through a shell company. His most recent update was a brief note saying his consulting business was going through some restructuring and that he appreciated people's patience. I sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. A man receiving that kind of money doesn't post about restructuring. A man receiving that kind of money doesn't look the way Spencer Norrell looked in those pictures, worn out, a little rumpled, someone keeping his head down rather than someone sitting on a windfall. The money was going to Spencer Norrell, but it wasn't staying with him, which meant someone else was waiting at the far end of that chain. And Spencer Norrell was somewhere in the middle, not by choice, I was starting to believe, but by necessity. I drove home with the heat running and the radio off, turning it all over. The December sky had gone that deep, flat gray of late afternoon by the time I pulled into the driveway. I made myself a bowl of soup, ate it standing at the counter, and tried to work out what I was still missing. I was rinsing the bowl when the knock came at the front door. Nothing like the hard, insistent pounding I'd heard from Nathan and Brianna the week before. This was different, 3 measured knocks, evenly spaced, the kind that asked instead of demanded. I looked through the peephole, and what I saw made me stand completely still for a full 5 seconds before I reached for the deadbolt. Standing in the cold December evening, looking a decade older than when I'd last laid eyes on him, was Burton Ashford, Brianna's father. I had met Burton Ashford 3 times before that night. Once at Nathan and Brianna's engagement dinner, where he'd shaken my hand with the firm assessing grip of a man who takes quick stock of people and files them away permanently. Once at the wedding briefly in the receiving line where our conversation had run about 40 seconds. And once at a birthday party for Owen 2 years back, where we'd stood near the same table for 10 minutes, exchanging the particular small talk of 2 men who share a grandchild and almost nothing else. He was 63 years old, trim, the kind of man who wore good clothes without calling attention to them. Tonight on my porch, in a navy blazer that had clearly been slept in or traveled in or both, he carried the look of someone who had been holding something heavy for longer than he could stand. I opened the door. "Mr. Hadley," he said. His voice was quieter than I remembered it. "I'm sorry for showing up like this. I wasn't certain you'd pick up if I called." I stepped back from the door. "Come in, Burton." He stepped inside, slowly taking in the front hallway, the way people do the first time they enter someone's home, not prying, just absorbing the simple fact of it, the ordinary evidence of a life lived here. His eyes moved across the framed photographs on the wall, the coat hooks, the small table by the door, where I kept my keys and sorted the mail. "It feels comfortable," he said. Something in the way he said it made me think he was talking about more than the furnishings. "Sit down," I said. "I'll put on coffee." We ended up across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where Nathan had delivered every difficult piece of news I'd received over the past 3 weeks. I set 2 mugs between us and waited. Burton wrapped both hands around his and looked down into it for a moment. Then he raised his eyes to me with the direct, slightly pained expression of a man who has rehearsed his opening and is now finding that preparation doesn't make the words come easier. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "And an apology, though I know the apology probably doesn't measure up to what's happened." He set the mug down. "Spencer Norrell called me last week. He told me what Brianna had been using his name for and what she'd threatened him with to keep him from saying anything. When he mentioned your name, I knew I couldn't stay out of it any longer. 'Tell me what you know,' I said." He exhaled. "Spencer Norrell. You've come across his name by now, I'd assume." I kept my face neutral. "I have." Spencer was Brianna's boyfriend in college before she met Nathan. They kept in touch afterward, not romantically, or at least... He paused, his jaw tightening. "Not as far as I know. About 2 years ago, Brianna went to him about registering a business in his name. She told him it was a consulting venture, that she'd manage everything on the operational side, and that he'd collect a small fee for letting her use his name on the LLC. His hands tightened around the mug. What he didn't fully grasp at the start was what the business was actually being used for. And when he did understand, I asked. Burton set his mug down. By that point, she had enough on him. Spencer had willingly signed documents early on that he hadn't read closely. Some of those documents contained financial representations that weren't accurate, nothing he thought was criminal, just optimistic business filings. But Brianna had copies. His voice dropped. She told him that if he stopped cooperating, she would report him to the IRS for fraudulent business filings. She said she had documentation that would make it look far worse than it actually was. She was blackmailing him. The words came out flat and precise because that was exactly what it was. Under Ohio law and under federal statute, using the threat of criminal exposure to force someone to act against their will is extortion, a felony. I didn't say that part aloud yet, but I noted it. Yes, Burton met my eyes. She was. He reached into his coat pocket and placed a small USB drive on the table between us. There are emails on this. Copies of transaction records, correspondence between Brianna and Spencer going back 18 months. He held his fingertips on it for a moment before sliding it toward me. I've had this for 6 weeks. I couldn't work out what to do with it. I looked at the drive without picking it up. Why are you bringing it to me now? Burton was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had gone rough around the edges, worn down to something unguarded. Because I made a mistake 4 years ago. Brianna got herself into some trouble with a business filing a smaller thing, nothing like this. She came to me in a panic, and I helped make it disappear. I thought I was looking out for her. He pressed his lips together. I think what I actually taught her was that consequences were negotiable. That if she found herself in trouble, someone would come and clean it up. His jaw shifted. I taught her the wrong lesson. And now you're sitting across from me at this table, and I can see clearly what that lesson has cost you. The kitchen held those words in silence. Outside, December wind pressed against the window glass. I looked at Burton Ashford, a man I had never really known, a man whose daughter had spent the past 3 weeks methodically trying to pull my life apart. and I tried to read what I was actually looking at. Genuine remorse or a father trying to get ahead of his own culpability. I reached over and picked up the USB drive, turned it in my fingers. "Burton," I said carefully, "is there anything on this drive that shifts the primary responsibility toward Nathan rather than Brianna?" A pause. Not long, maybe 2 seconds. But 2 seconds is considerable time when someone is deciding whether to answer honestly. "The documents I selected are the ones I found most relevant," he said, which was not the same as saying no. I slid the drive into my shirt pocket. "I'm going to have this reviewed by my attorney and by the bank's compliance team before anything on it gets used. If what's here is what you say it is, it matters. But I need to verify it on my own terms." Burton nodded the nod of a man who had anticipated exactly that response and found it reasonable. He stood to leave, and I walked him to the front door. On the porch, he stopped and turned back. The cold moved between us. "Brianna loves Nathan," he said. "In her way. But she has never loved anyone as much as she loves what the right kind of life looks like from the outside." He drew his coat tighter. "I hope you stay well, Russell. I genuinely do." I watched his taillights until the car disappeared around the corner. Then I went back inside, sat at the kitchen table with the USB drive beside my coffee mug and my notepad open to a clean page. I called Stu. He picked up on the second ring, listened to everything without cutting in, and said, "Don't plug it into anything yet. I'll have someone look at it tomorrow." Then, "Russell, one more thing. Donna called me this afternoon. There's something about that Thanksgiving dinner guest list I think you need to hear." The guest list. I had lost track of it entirely. Whatever it held, I understood in that moment it was going to reshape everything I thought I knew about the night this had all started. Donna called Friday afternoon, while I was brewing a pot of coffee I probably didn't need. I had slept badly the night before, not from bad dreams, but because my mind had spent the hours cycling back to the same question Burton had left behind when he walked out my door. "What else don't I know yet?" I picked up before the second ring. The IT team finished going through the drive last night. Donna said, bypassing any greeting the way she always did when something was pressing. "Most of what's on it lines up with what we already have from the transaction records. The emails between Brianna and Spencer, the dates, the content, the pattern of instructions they check out." A pause. "But there are 3 documents where the metadata was altered. The creation dates don't match the content. I'd flag those before they're used in any legal proceeding. Stu already knows. He's having someone verify them independently," I said. "Good." She exhaled, not quite relief, but the sound of a woman setting something down that she'd been carrying carefully. "There's something else. Something that has nothing to do with the financial records." Another pause, longer this time. "Russell, do you know a man named Warren Okafor?" I turned the name over. "No." "He's an estate planning attorney, practices out of Hudson, specializes in elder law guardianship petitions, conservatorship filings, that kind of work." She let that land for exactly 1 second before pressing on. "His name appears on the Thanksgiving dinner guest list that turned up in Brianna's email correspondence on the drive. Along with a doctor, Nadine Chu. She's a neurologist who has testified in guardianship capacity evaluations in Summit County at least 4 times over the past 6 years." The coffee maker finished its cycle behind me. The sound of it seemed to come from somewhere far off. "Both of them were at the dinner," I said. Not a question. "Both of them were at the dinner," Donna confirmed. "And there's an email Brianna sent to Warren Okafor 2 days before Thanksgiving. I'm going to read you the relevant section." I heard the click of her keyboard. She read, Warren looking forward to having you and Nadine at dinner Thursday. As we discussed, Russell has declined our invitations to family events on several occasions recently and has become increasingly difficult to engage. His behavior has been erratic, and he's been isolating himself. I think Thursday will give you both a chance to get a sense of what we've been dealing with firsthand. The phone was in a white-knuckle grip, the plastic edge cutting into my palm. She planned it that way, I said. The words came out hollowed barely above a whisper, that particular flatness a man's voice falls into when what's boiling underneath it won't fit inside four walls. That's how it looks, Donna said, choosing each word. And Russell, neither of those people had any reason to suspect they weren't hearing the truth. They sat down to a meal. They were introduced to a room full of strangers. They listened while a host painted a picture of a troubled family member. Not one of them understood they'd been recruited into something engineered. I set my free hand down on the kitchen counter and pressed it there, cold tile, solid surface, something real to hold on to. Let me tell you exactly what Brianna had done. She'd sent a targeted personal email to a specialized elder law attorney and a neurologist whose practice centers on evaluating mental capacity, not to get their professional opinions in the abstract, but to seat them in a room where my chair was empty. To let her describe me in her own words as unpredictable, withdrawn, combative. To turn them without their knowledge into potential witnesses who could one day swear under oath. Yes, I heard Brianna Hadley speak about her father-in-law's deteriorating state of mind. Yes, this was before any court filing. She hadn't required my presence at that table. What she'd required was my absence from it. The slight of being left out wasn't the damage. It was the instrument. Donna. My voice had a ragged edge to it, worn down to almost nothing. That same evening, she'd told everyone there that I had been asked and refused to attend. The email to Warren makes it plain enough, Donna said. She wrote, declined our invitations, the word plural, doing specific work, as if I'd turned them down repeatedly. Something hot pressed sharply behind my eyes, and I held it back. Not quite tears. The thing that comes before them, that pressure that rises when your body has already accepted the truth, your mind is still arguing against. 28 days earlier, I had been at my kitchen counter rolling out pumpkin pie dough, watching the clock, looking forward to Thanksgiving. In the low-key interior way, I always had the thought of seeing my grandchildren enough to carry me through the whole week. And while I stood there counting down the table I would never be permitted to approach was being arranged like a set piece. The people who would never so much as glance at me were receiving a briefing on who I was. My absence, which I had swallowed without protest, not wanting to be the one who caused trouble, was being shaped into a narrative I hadn't been shown and hadn't consented to. Thank you, Donna, I said, for everything. Take care of yourself, Russell, she said. Not stiffly, not the way an attorney wraps up a call, but the way a person speaks when they're actually worried about you. That stayed with me well after I set the phone down. I sat at the kitchen table and didn't move for a long time. I never picked up the coffee. I sat looking at the bare patch of wall where Evelyn's calendar had hung for decades, the one she'd filled in with every birthday, every school concert, every dental checkup for 30 years. And I turned over in my mind the distinction between a real family and a polished imitation of one. Later that evening, Stu called. I've been going through the front door camera footage, he said. The visits from the first part of December, Russell. There's something on the 3rd I need you to look at closely. Can you get to it tonight? I said yes. Good, he said. Then a pause. I think once you see it, some things are going to click into place. He was right. Friday night, I opened the doorbell app on my laptop and pulled up the timestamp Stu had flagged. December 3rd. The afternoon Nathan had shown up at my door, no Brianna with him this time. just him alone to deliver the demand for $18,400 over the phone while he stood on my front porch. The visit itself had slipped out of my memory. I'd held on to the phone call, but the fact that he'd physically come to the house while he made it working, the porch back and forth, while I stood just behind the door, listening, not opening it, that detail had been lost. I watched the recording. Stu called at 9 the next morning, a Saturday. I was still in my bathrobe, an untouched second cup of coffee sitting cold on the desk next to me. "See what I meant?" he asked. I told him I had. In that footage, Nathan stood outside my door for 11 minutes straight. He was never still, shifting his weight hands in constant motion, restless and coiled. But what Stu had specifically pointed me toward was a smaller thing. Twice during those 11 minutes, Nathan reached into the right breast pocket of his jacket, checked something, then adjusted how his coat was sitting. The camera was a high-definition unit I'd put up 2 years prior, and at the moment, Nathan stepped to the door to knock. The closest he got to the lens, you could see it, without any question. The slim lit rectangle of a phone screen glowing through the fabric of that pocket, a recording app open and running. Shurkihai. He made the trip out there specifically to capture it on audio, Stu said. That phone call about the mortgage, he was running it from your own front porch recording device live in his breast pocket the whole time. I put my mug down on the desk. My hand didn't shake, but deep in my chest, behind the sternum, something had gone tight and cold as stone. He wanted what I said, committed to a recording, I said. Not just any recording, a very particular one, Stu said. Cast your mind back, Russell. The exact words he chose during that call. I did. You don't remember what you signed, Dad. You don't understand how serious this is. You're not thinking clearly about what this means for the house. Every line had been laid like a trap, designed to throw me off balance, to bait a reaction. A 68-year-old man hollering at his son over a mortgage, tripping over his own thoughts, blowing up in a way that could be handed to a physician or an attorney and held up as evidence of erratic behavior. I ended the call, I said. You did, Stu said. And before that point, everything audible in the recording, your voice stays level all the way through. No muddled thinking, no outbursts, nothing that could be used against you. A beat of silence. Russell, the fact that you kept your head may have protected you from something serious. They came looking for a specific kind of tape. They walked away empty. I thought about Evelyn. She had a line she'd returned to, that my steadiness under pressure was half genuine character and half sheer mule-headed stubbornness, and she was never fully certain which one was at the wheel. I'd never spent much time trying to figure it out. It had done its job every time I'd needed it. So where does Brianna go from here? I asked. Now that the recording failed her, Stu's answer was deliberate, each word placed with care. She moves towards something with fewer variables. A phone call, she can't dictate what comes out of your mouth. But she may look for ways to engineer the situation itself. He paused. Before you get in the car and go anywhere this week, Russell, I want you to have it looked at. Not a quick walk around, I mean underneath it, by someone who knows exactly what they're checking for. A cold current moved through me. You're saying you think the vehicle may have been interfered with. I'm saying that when a plan doesn't produce results, someone who's this committed to an outcome doesn't simply stop. The approach shifts. His voice held no drama. It was measured, matter of fact, a precaution being raised, rather than an alarm being sounded. One more thing, you changed the locks on the house. What about the garage deadbolt keypad code? I stood very still and looked at the wall. I had not touched the garage code. The same combination Nathan had been using for 6 years was still sitting there, live and unchanged. I had methodically replaced every keyed lock on the property and completely overlooked the one door that didn't require a key at all. No, I said. I let that slip. Take care of it today, Stu said. And Monday, before you go anywhere, get someone under that car. When the call was done, I walked out to the garage and reset the deadbolt keypad code, standing in the chill of that concrete space, my breath showing in small white puffs. I laid my hand on the hood of the truck and left it there a moment. 9 years I'd driven that Ford. Evelyn used to grumble about the passenger side seat heater that had given out years back. She ran cold, and it drove her crazy. My hand wasn't entirely steady. I stood there thinking about what it would mean if someone had let themselves in. If someone had punched in a code that should have meant nothing to them anymore and gotten close to something I counted on every single day to carry me safely from one place to the next. I kept coming back to what Brianna had said on my front porch the Friday before. You haven't won anything. You've just made this harder than it needed to be. The way she'd said it, it wasn't anger. It was a prediction. Monday morning, I pulled out of the driveway slowly and headed to Pete Garfield's shop on Lover's Lane Road. Pete had serviced my vehicles for 12 years. He was steady and plain-spoken, not a man given to exaggeration or theatrics. So when he rolled out from under the chassis 40 minutes later and got to his feet and stood there, eyes on me, taking a long moment before he said a single word I already knew. Whatever he'd found under there was not going to be nothing. Pete Garfield has been my mechanic for 12 years. He's a compact, methodical man in his mid-50s who runs his shop the way good tradespeople run everything, quietly, without drama, with an attention to detail that other people mistake for slowness, until they realize nothing he touches ever has to come back. He's told me twice in 12 years that something was seriously wrong with my vehicle. Both times he was right. Both times his face looked the way it did now, standing in the open bay of his Lover's Lane Road shop on a cold Monday morning, wiping his hands on a rag that didn't need wiping. Looking at me the way a doctor looks at a patient before he says the words the patient already knows are coming. "Russell," he said, "come over here and let me walk you through something." He led me under the lift. The truck hung above us in the fluorescent light, its undercarriage exposed, all its inner workings laid bare, visible the way a thing is only visible when it's been raised off the ground and stripped of its dignity. Pete pointed to the rear left wheel assembly. "You see this line here?" He indicated a thin metal pipe running along the frame, connected at both ends to fittings that ought to have been snug and fixed. "Brake fluid line. It carries hydraulic pressure to the rear left caliper. No pressure, that wheel doesn't respond when you need it to. What I can see," I said, "is the fitting at the upper junction." He touched it with one finger, not pulling, not adjusting, just pointing, has been backed off. Not all the way. Maybe a quarter turn, maybe slightly more. Just enough to break the seal. You lose fluid gradually, not all at once. After a few miles of ordinary driving, pressure falls. By the time you're moving at highway speed, and you really need the brakes, you'd have roughly 60% of your normal stopping power. He held my gaze. Maybe less. "Is this something that could happen on its own?" I asked, though I already knew the answer, and so did he. Pete shook his head, slow and deliberate. "Fittings don't work themselves loose. Not on a truck this age, not with this service record. Somebody put a wrench on this fitting and turned it." He kept his voice even, no accusation, no theater, just the plain, technical verdict of a man who'd spent 30 years distinguishing between wear and interference. Whoever it was knew what they were after. They didn't sever the line or crack the fitting that would have shown up immediately. They just backed it off enough to start a slow bleed. The kind of thing that could get written off as coincidence or old age. Old age. Those two words landed somewhere cold and specific inside me. I stepped back out from under the lift and put my shoulders against the bay wall. I checked my hands. They weren't shaking. I made a point of verifying that. but something at the center of my chest had contracted, gone tight and motionless. The way a house falls completely quiet in the moment, just before a storm rolls in. I'm going to need you to document this, I said. Photographs, your written assessment, anything you can put on paper. Don't repair it yet. Leave everything exactly as you found it for now. Pete looked at me with the steady attention of a man who had just registered that this conversation had moved well beyond a service call. You know what happened here, he said. I have a strong suspicion, I said, and I need to make some calls. I stepped out into the December cold and called Stu first. He listened without cutting in, then asked 3 things. When had someone last had access to the garage? What exactly had Pete found? Had I filed a vandalism report yet? Then he said, call the police first. Get a case number on the tampering, then ring me back. I made the call to Akron PD from the parking lot. An officer arrived at the shop within the hour, took down Pete's assessment, photographed the brake line, and opened a report. Criminal damaging, potentially aggravated if intent to harm could be established. The officer was careful and thorough and made no promises, which I respected. While she was wrapping up her report, I called my neighbor, Mrs. Petford. She was a retired school teacher who had lived directly across the street from me for 14 years and had put up a wide-angle security camera on her garage after a car break-in 2 years back. I had helped her mount the bracket myself. I knew exactly what it covered. Of course, she said without hesitation the moment I told her what I needed. I'll pull the footage right now. She called back in 20 minutes. Her camera had a clear line of sight to the front of my garage. On the evening of December 8th, 4 days ago, a figure had walked up to my garage door at 8:17 p.m. and gone inside after roughly 15 seconds at the keypad. The figure had the hood of a dark jacket pulled up, but the build, the height, and the particular way the person moved were, she said carefully, consistent with someone she recognized as Nathan from his visits to my house over the years. The figure came back out 9 minutes later, carrying a cardboard box. 9 minutes. Long enough to take a box off a storage shelf. Long enough to do something else besides. I called Nathan. He picked up on the first ring, which told me he'd been waiting for a call he wasn't sure was going to come. Were you at my house Sunday evening? No lead-up, no cushioning. A pause. Then Brianna asked me to pick up a box of old tax documents. She said they were in your garage storage. She said you wouldn't mind. Did you touch my truck? No. His response was instant and clipped. Dad. I went in. I found the box on the second shelf and I walked out. I didn't go anywhere near the truck. I didn't even look at it. The brake line on the rear left wheel was deliberately loosened. Nathan. I kept my voice flat and measured. If I had taken that truck onto the highway without knowing, I could have been seriously hurt. Or worse. The silence that followed stretched long enough that I heard his breathing shift, a sharp pull of air, then something that sounded like the deliberate exhale of a man fighting to keep himself from unraveling. Dad, he said. His voice had gone raw. I didn't touch the truck. I swear to you, I would never. I couldn't. He stopped, then started over. I went in, and I got the box. That is all I did. The camera across the street has you inside for 9 minutes, I said. The box was on the second shelf, and I had to shift some things around to reach it. That's why it took that long. His voice frayed at the edges. Dad, I am telling you the truth. I did not touch your truck. I looked at my own hands there in the parking lot of Pete's shop. The cold had crept into my fingers while I wasn't paying attention. Then someone else did it, I said. While you were in there, or before or after, but the code was yours to know Nathan. I'd replaced every lock on the house, and I let the garage slip, and you had that code for 6 years. I let out a breath. Whether or not you touched that truck, the door stood open because of you. He said nothing. I heard something, a muffled sound, swallowed and pressed down. The sound a man makes when he has finally come up against a consequence he can't talk himself around. I hung up, finished with the officer, and drove home slowly, windows cracked, despite the cold, listening to every sound the truck made to the ordinary working of things that were supposed to work. That evening, Stu called. The police report is filed. Good. Now, Russell, I need you in my office tomorrow morning. I've been working back through the original paperwork from when you co-signed the mortgage 4 years ago, all the way to the beginning. A pause. There's something in there I think you may have lost track of. Something Evelyn made you do before you wrote that check. I stood in my kitchen with the phone to my ear and felt something shift low and quiet at the base of my chest. Not dread this time. Something older and calmer than that. Evelyn, even now, even still. I'll be there at 9, I said. Stu's office on Tuesday morning had its usual smell, old paper, fresh coffee, the faint dry heat of a building warmed by the same system since roughly 1986. He had a file open on the desk when I walked in. Not the fraud report, not the USB documentation, not the mortgage delinquency records. Something older, thinner. A manila folder that looked as if it had been sitting untouched in storage for 4 years. He slid it across the desk as I settled into the chair. Before you put your name on that co-signer agreement on Nathan's mortgage, Stu said, do you remember what else we handled that same week, you and Evelyn, both of you right here in this office? I looked down at the folder but didn't open it yet. I was reaching back through 4 years of ordinary life. That particular week, before Nathan and Brianna closed on the Fairlawn Heights house, the week Evelyn had been somewhere between her 3rd and 4th chemotherapy cycles, still well enough to drive herself to this office. She wanted the money on paper, I said slowly, not treated as a gift. She wanted it to be a loan. That's right. Stu folded his hands. Evelyn was very clear about that. She said he glanced at his notes, and the care with which he did it told me he'd written it down at the time because she had said it in a way that was worth preserving, that she didn't want Nathan to lose sight of what had been given up. That if it stayed a gift, it would dissolve into the flooring and the furniture and be gone from memory inside a year. But a loan was something you carried, something you honored. My throat tightened until swallowing took real effort. We drew up a family loan agreement, Stu continued. $120,000, zero interest, repayable across 20 years in modest monthly installments. Nathan signed it. You signed it. Evelyn signed as a witness because she wanted her name on the document. He paused. And then she asked me to do one more thing. She asked me to file a lien against the property. He opened the folder and turned it to face me. A second line recorded at the Summit County Recorder's Office. Russell Hadley, line holder. $120,000 secured against the Fairlawn Heights property, filed 4 years ago, 3 weeks before Nathan and Brianna moved in. In Ohio, as in most states, a lien on a property means the lien holder must be paid out before the property can be refinanced, sold, or transferred free of encumbrance. The mortgage lender, Keystone Federal Bank, held the primary lien, the largest one, first in line in any transaction. But sitting right behind them in second position was my name. $120,000, secured, legal, recorded. I stared at the document, the signature lines at the bottom, Stu's neat notarization, Nathan's signature, and then Evelyn's name written in that particular, careful cursive she used when she was putting her name to something she considered important. A few weeks before she died, she had known she was running out of time, and she had spent some of what was left doing this. My eyes burned so sharp and sudden that I had to press 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and hold them there. She never told me, I said. My voice came out barely above a whisper. She told me she didn't want you thinking of it as a financial protection, Stu said quietly. She said if you framed it that way in your mind, you'd feel like you were being suspicious of Nathan. She wanted you to simply love your son and let the paperwork handle the rest. He paused. Her words. I pressed my lips together hard. I let the feeling move through me the way you let feelings move when you stop fighting them. Not suppressing it, not performing it, just letting it settle into what it was. Evelyn, even from wherever she'd gone, even 4 years after she left, still positioning herself between me and the things that could do damage. Stu, I pulled my voice back under most of its control. Tell me what this means in plain language. It means Brianna could not refinance that property, could not tap its equity, could not put it on the market and walk away with the proceeds, not without satisfying your lien first. $120,000 would have to come to you before Nathan and Brianna saw a single dollar of whatever equity remained. He held my gaze without blinking. The current estimated equity in that property after the outstanding mortgage balance is approximately $230,000. Your lien is first in line for $120,000 of that. I looked up at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. The forged signature on the refinancing application. I said it wasn't only about borrowing more money. No, Stu said. It was to release the lien. A refinancing application requires all lien holders to formally sign off to surrender their security interest, so the new loan can be processed without encumbrance. Without your signature releasing this lien, the refinancing couldn't close. Nathan and Brianna couldn't reach the equity, couldn't borrow against it, couldn't do anything with it at all. He paused. That's what they needed your name for. Not simply as a cosigner, as the line holder standing between them and $230,000. The room settled around that fact. I felt it arrange itself, every piece of the last 3 weeks snapping into a new configuration, like old gears finally finding the teeth they were built to catch. Not a run of reckless decisions by people in financial freefall. A sequence. A deliberate, patient sequence aimed at one thing: Evelyn's name on that lien document. She knew I said softly, not to Stu specifically, just to the room, to the quiet, to whatever you address when the person you most want to speak to isn't there anymore. She knew something like this was possible. She planned for it. Stu looked at the folder for a moment, and when he raised his eyes again, there was something in his expression that went beyond professional. The look of a man who had known us both well and long enough to understand exactly what he was witnessing. She was the most practical woman I ever worked with, he said, and one of the most quietly fierce. I almost smiled. It hurt, and it didn't both at once, the way things do when love and loss are living in the exact same space. I left Stu's office an hour later carrying copies of everything: the lien document, the family loan agreement, the recorder's stamp, Evelyn's signature. I drove home with the folder on the passenger seat, the heater running, my eyes on the road. That evening, Nathan called. His voice was unlike any version of it I'd heard across the past 3 weeks. Not angry, not calculating, not performing. Just tired, the exhaustion of a man who has been carrying something too heavy for too long and is beginning to wonder whether he's allowed to set it down. Dad, he said, can we meet? Just the two of us. No lawyers. Just us. A pause. I have something I need to show you. Something on my phone. His voice broke slightly on the last word. I think it's time I told you the truth. All of it. I looked at Evelyn's photo on the mantel and thought about what she would say to me. When and where, I said. The Canton Road diner was quieter than usual on a Wednesday noon, just the low clatter of dishes drifting from the kitchen, an oldies station playing softly from a speaker near the register, and the smell of burnt coffee and something that felt almost like home. I got there first. Same corner booth as before, same vinyl patched with duct tape since at least 2007, same sightline to the door. Nathan walked in at 12:10. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 4 days and had given up hiding it. The shadows under his eyes were deep and bruised. His jacket was creased the way clothes get when someone has slept in them or not slept at all. He dropped into the seat across from me without reaching for the menu. "Thanks for coming," he said. His voice was raw, worn back to something I hadn't heard from him in years. Something that sounded almost like the Nathan who used to call me after a rough day just to talk. "You said you had something to show me," I said. He nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket and set his phone on the table between us, unlocked messages already open, and pushed it across to me. "Read it," he said. "All of it. Start from October." I picked up the phone. What I read over the next 4 minutes left my chest carrying a pain that was grief and fury in equal measure. Message after message from Brianna. Instructions, requests, demands dressed up as suggestions. "Can you take a photo of your dad's driver's license? The bank needs it for verification." Then, "Did you sign the extension paperwork I left on the counter?" Don't read the whole thing. It's just routine. Then 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I've invited Warren Okafor for dinner. Don't bring up anything about Russell's finances with him. Just let me steer that conversation if it comes up. And then, in late November, a message that sent a chill across the back of my neck. "The garage code is still 4471, right? I need to get something from storage next week." I set the phone down on the table. My hands were completely steady. I made a point of registering that. "Nathan," I said, "I need you to take me through what you knew and when you knew it." And he did haltingly at first, then faster the way a man talks when he has been holding his breath for weeks, and finally decides the only way forward is to exhale all the way. He told me about the documents he had signed without reading. He told me about the conversations he'd half heard and chosen not to pursue. He told me about the morning Brianna had asked him to call me, about the mortgage had fed him exactly what to say, coached him on the lines word for word. "You don't remember what you signed. You don't understand the situation." As if she'd handed him a script. His eyes were wet and red-rimmed by the time he finished. His jaw was working hard, the way a man's jaw works when he's fighting something back that he doesn't want to lose in a public place. "I knew something was wrong," he said, his voice fracturing. "I knew it, and I kept telling myself I was reading too much into it, that she was just under pressure, that things would settle down." He pressed his fist against his mouth for a moment. "I let her use me, Dad. I let her turn me into a weapon against you." I looked at my son across that table. The man I'd carried home from the hospital 38 years ago. The man I'd taught to ride a bike, change a tire, read a blueprint. And I felt something split open inside me and ache the way a bone aches when it first starts to knit. "I need you to forward me those messages," I said, "or give Stu direct access to this phone. What's on here is important." "I know," he said. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "I'll do whatever you need. I'll sit down with Stu. I'll sign whatever he puts in front of me." Then his phone lit up on the table between us. Nathan looked down. His face changed so fast and so completely that I registered the shift before I could even name it. Something went dark behind his eyes like a lamp cut off at the switch. He picked up the phone with a hand that was no longer steady and stared at the screen. I could make out enough from where I was sitting. A photograph. Owen and Nora, my grandchildren, in the back seat of a car, both of them grinning at whoever held the camera, completely unaware of everything happening around them. Beneath the photo, a line of text I couldn't read from where I sat. Nathan read it once, then again, and something that had been open and raw and almost courageous in him for the last 20 minutes shut itself off like a wound sealing against its own healing. "I can't," he said. The words came out broken and flat at the same time. "I'm sorry, Dad. I can't do this." Nathan was already on his feet, his chair grinding back hard across the floor. "She has the kids. Do you understand? She has the kids with her right now. And if I..." He stopped, pressed both hands flat on the table, breathing through it. Then he straightened and looked at me with the eyes of a man who is making a choice and hating himself for it. "I'm sorry. Forget everything I said." He turned and moved toward the door so quickly his jacket caught the corner of the table. Something clattered to the floor. I watched him keep going, no pause, no backward glance, the way a person moves when they're fleeing something that will follow them wherever they go. After the door swung shut, I looked down. His phone had slipped off the table and landed face down on the floor beside my foot left behind, in the rush of a man who'd moved too fast to notice what had dropped from his hands. I didn't touch it. I picked up my own phone and called Stu. "He walked out," I said, "but his phone is still here on the floor next to my chair. It has everything on it, Stu. Everything." A pause. "Then don't touch it. I'm sending someone right now. Stay with it until they get there." Another pause, shorter. "Russell, this might be exactly what we needed." I sat with the phone until Stu's paralegal arrived 40 minutes later, documented it, and sealed it into an evidence bag. Then I drove home through the early dark of a December afternoon, both hands on the wheel, telling myself that the last piece had just dropped into place. Stu had sent his paralegal to the diner with a sealed evidence bag and a chain of custody form, which was exactly the right approach and exactly why I'd called him, rather than picking up the phone myself. Thursday morning, I sat in his office while a forensic IT specialist he'd brought in, a quiet man in his 40s named Ferris, who directed his words at Stu and spoke only when it was necessary, worked through Nathan's device with the kind of concentration that makes a room feel smaller. Nathan had given the passcode voluntarily by phone at 7 in the morning when Stu called. That single fact that Nathan had answered and handed it over without being asked twice told me something I stored away quietly. "The message thread between Brianna and Nathan is extensive," Ferris said, not lifting his eyes from the laptop. "Goes back 14 months. Instructions, financial directives, coaching on what to say to the bank to Russell." He scrolled. "There's also a secondary thread outgoing from Brianna's number to an unlisted contact. The content is..." He paused, reading operational. Stu looked at me. "This is the thread we need, Russell. Tell him what you're after." "Anything about the vehicle," I said. "The brake line." Ferris scrolled for less than 30 seconds. Then he stopped. "November 30th, he said. Brianna's number to the unlisted contact. The message reads, "The Ford is in the second garage stall. Left rear brake line. Make it look like wear, not damage. You know what I need. The debt goes away when it's done." The room went very quiet. I pressed the heel of my hand into the edge of the table and held it there. My jaw was set hard. My eyes burned with a heat that had nowhere useful to go. I had driven that truck for 9 years. I'd taken Owen to school in that truck on the mornings Nathan and Brianna were running behind. I had driven Evelyn to her last appointment in that truck because she said the height of the seat made her feel like a person rather than a patient. And someone had sent instructions about its brake line in a text message casually, the way you'd send someone a grocery list. "The unlisted number," Stu said to Ferris. "Can you trace it?" "Already cross-referencing." A pause. "It's registered to a prepaid carrier, but the device connects to purchase records tied to a name already in your investigation file. He looked at Stu. Someone associated with Bright Horizon Media. Stu nodded. He turned to me. The police report from Pete Garfield's shop combined with this thread gives us criminal damaging with intent potentially aggravated given what was at stake. He paused. And it draws a direct line from Brianna to the act. That afternoon, the detectives handling my vandalism report received the new evidence. They brought Brianna in for a formal interview. Stu called me at 4:30. She told them Nathan had orchestrated everything he said, that she'd been pressured, that she'd signed things he placed in front of her without understanding what she was agreeing to. His voice was level, unsurprised. She had the version ready and waiting. And Nathan, I asked. Nathan, Stu said, and something in the way he said the name made me go, still gave his full cooperation. He walked the detectives through the entire message thread, acknowledged his own role in it, and made no attempt to lay off the parts that were his. A pause. He also confirmed that the break line message originated with Brianna, that he had no knowledge of it. Another pause. Russell, for whatever it's worth. I've been doing this for 34 years. When someone cooperates the way he cooperated today, they've made a decision they're not going to reverse. I thanked him and set the phone down. Outside my kitchen window, the first snow of winter was coming down. Not in any dramatic way, just the quiet, uncertain kind, the flakes that don't yet know whether they're going to last. December in Akron. Evelyn used to stand at this same window when the first snow arrived and say it meant the year was finally settling its accounts. I filled the kettle. Not for coffee. Evelyn had always held that coffee after 5 o'clock was a decision you made and then paid for later. I made tea. I stood at the counter while it steeped and looked out at the snow drifting down over the bare maple and the still street and the house that had always been mine, that had never stopped being mine, that someone had spent months trying to strip away from me, one forged signature at a time. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel relieved. What I felt was something quieter and more fundamental than either. The feeling of a man who has done what had to be done and is now, for the first time in a long while, standing in his own kitchen without bracing for what comes next. Nathan had chosen the truth, late at real cost in a way that would follow him for years. But he had chosen it. I thought about Evelyn's name on that lean document. I thought about her handwriting, careful and deliberate, signing something she knew I would need long after she was no longer here to hand it to me herself. She'd never mentioned it to me, and I knew the reason. She'd been certain I would have told her to let it go. She went ahead regardless, because that was Evelyn. I lifted my tea. Through the window, the snow was beginning to settle and hold. There was hard ground still ahead. The investigation, the court proceedings, the slow unraveling of everything Brianna had assembled. Nathan remained a reckoning that hadn't arrived yet, not this week, maybe not for months. And Owen and Nora were never far from my thoughts, two children absorbing damage from choices that were never theirs. But that night, for the first time since the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I was simply a man in his kitchen while the season's first snow came down outside. That was enough. A year has passed since that Thanksgiving. Brianna is facing charges. Nathan is holding down 2 jobs, paying back what he owes, piecing together something neither of us has a name for yet. Owen and Nora still phone me on weekends. That part held. That is where this story lands. Not with shouting, not with a dramatic confrontation at the door. Just a man standing in his own kitchen holding a cup of tea watching snow settle outside a window that had always been his. Looking back, I think about what all of it cost. It cost me a version of my son I may never fully get back. It cost me weeks of sleep and a kind of innocence about the people I thought I knew. But I believe God puts certain things in place long before we understand why. And Evelyn filing that lien in silence with her name written carefully on the line was one of those things. She couldn't be there to protect me, so she did the next best she could while she still had time. If these father stories have taught me anything, it is this. Document the loan. A gift and a loan are not the same thing, and the difference can protect your family when trust breaks down. Pay attention to access. Who has your codes, your passwords, your keys? Revisit that list before you need to. If someone tells you that you are going to regret standing up for yourself, take that seriously. Not as a reason to back down, but as information about who you are dealing with. And when family justice finally arrives, it rarely looks the way you imagined it would. It looks like paperwork. It looks like a paralegal with an evidence bag. It looks like your late wife's handwriting on a document she never mentioned. If this story moved, you leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you haven't yet subscribed to Alpha Dad Stories, there are more of these waiting for you. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Take care of yourselves out there. I mean that.